Good morning and welcome to the Point. Well, it's already May, and that means we are in full swing for Decision 2014. Just about 90 days from now, we'll have a big primary race, and there are a lot of primary races that we'll be covering in our viewing area. Here on the program, we're going to try to get as many of those races on as we possibly can, beginning this morning with a Senate race that features an incumbent and a challenger. It's the 34th Senate District. That's Oceana, Newaygo, and Muskegon counties. Jeff Hansen is the Republican incumbent. Nick Sundquist is the Republican challenger. They will face off on August 5th. We talked with both of them this week. So you've served over in the House of Representatives. You've served one term in the state Senate. You're running again. What made you decide to run again?
Well, as we're working towards the future here, Rick, things are starting to go better. We've made a lot of progress. We've done a lot of heavy lifting on, in the state. A lot of the legislative things that we've had to do have been very, very difficult. But we had to go from where we were to where we want to go. We want to make sure that we're listening to people. We want to make sure that our education system is sound. We got to make sure that people have jobs. We have to make sure that our employers are, able to stay here and be successful, because we need to make sure that our kids are able to stay here. I don't want anybody's kid to have to move away from Michigan to get a job, and so we're doing pretty well. We're doing better, I should say. Let's not say pretty well. We're doing better, but we're not there. We need to continue down the path to make sure that, as we're moving down the path, that we continue making things better.
You served in some of the really bleak days over in the House when budgets were impossible to come by, where there wasn't enough money to meet basic needs, and when there was divided government. How do you see where we are today different from that? And you say you think we're doing better. How so?
Well, I look at the fact that for the last 3 years we've had our budget done on time by June 1st, which is, I think, the first time ever we've had 3 budgets in a row like that. This year we'll have it done again by June 1st. It gives everybody an opportunity to look at it, critique it, make sure that it's right. That is responsible. We're putting money away. We're paying down our long-term debt. And it's just going to make Michigan a better place. Our bond rating has been upgraded 3 times in the last 3 years. Very, very important for the state of Michigan. We've got people moving to Michigan finally. We also have Michigan is I think #1 in the country in industrial jobs that are being created. Good things happening, but we have to continue, working on that to make sure that we bring Michigan all the way back.
One of the things that you also talked about is good, better, but not as good as it can be. So when you talk about continuing to make it better, if you're elected for another term, what is it you want to accomplish before you leave the legislature?
Well, I really believe that, as we move forward, we have to continue the fiscal responsibility that we have put in place. With getting the budget done on time, making sure that we have a rainy day fund available, being responsible with the dollars, paying down our long-term debt, because we have a long-term debt. Listening the other day to the governor speak about the fact that he can give you the exact date that will be paid down on our long-term debt, and it's 2038. And it's going to take us a little time to get there, but we have to do it, because it's only fair to our kids and grandkids that we don't leave them a ton of debt when it's their turn to be in charge.
Briefly, and I don't want to, because we're very much talking about this primary election, and I want you to have a chance to state your positions there, but briefly, talk about that debt, because some people will say, well, how can you have debt? You can't borrow money. You're not supposed to have an unbalanced budget, but this really is the long-term, particularly debt that's owed to workers in many cases.
Right. It's a lot of the retirement and things like that had not been paid for when it was happening. We weren't keeping up with the payments that we should have. We've had to make extra payments the last few years to try and catch up. It's made a huge difference. We've paid down billions of dollars with only millions of dollars. It's really a responsible thing to do, and we need to continue on.
What do you hear as you prepare for this campaign cycle? I know there's always a lot of door-to-door work involved, and you may not have gotten to that just yet, but I know you do a lot of town hall type meetings and meet with constituents. What are the concerns that you hear in your district, a district that by the way, has certainly seen its challenge when it comes to employment and other issues?
Yeah, we have had a lot of challenges as it's gone on, but a lot of things I hear about is making sure that our kids are educated for the future. Career tech education is one of the big things we have to look at, and trying to make it available for so our kids can do it. Looking at the curriculum that we have to make sure they have an opportunity to do that. Our roads, we have to take a look at our roads. We have to find a way to fix them. We're in bad shape, and we know we are. It's just a matter of how do we do it. We've put $300 million in the last year and a half. That's not, where we got to go. That's a one-time fix. We have to go further than that.
When you look at the potential of 4 more years, you just identified perhaps one of the biggest issues is what do you do about roads? And I don't know if you subscribe to the 1.2 or more billion dollars a year for the next 10 years, but let's just pretend for a moment that might be the answer. Is there a way, and we got about 30 seconds left or so, is there a way to get to that kind of money without significantly increasing revenue?
That's going to be the big question as we go through this, because we're digging, we're flipping over every stone to make sure that everything that we possibly can work towards it goes there. We have to make sure that we keep our education strong, keep funding that at a good level, and then making sure that that we do our local roads also, and not just pick on the state roads, because if the local roads aren't going to get what they need, it's not going to do a whole lot of good to do state roads, because I'm telling you the locals are in worse shape than the state.
Well, let's start with the basics. You're running for the state senate. It's a big decision to decide you're going to do that. Tell me why.
Well, the reason we're running is primarily Mr. Hansen's voting record. It's people talk about voter apathy an awful lot, and I think that in this case, when you have a Democrat and a Republican and there's fundamentally no difference between them, I think we're going to get more people interested in voting if there's actually some reasonable debate. And Mr. Hansen voted for Medicaid expansion, which essentially brings Obamacare here to Michigan. He's quoted as saying he thought it was a good idea on account of the 10,000 people in the district it might help. My question is, how many people in the district have lost their insurance coverage or are facing much higher premiums? And so it's going to be an important race.
As a point of clarification, you're right, he voted for Medicaid expansion, but had he voted for it or against it, the impacts of the Affordable Care Act would have come to the state anyway, right?
Possibly. Possibly. The state of Oklahoma, and I'm not sure what the status of that suit is now, but the Attorney General is suing the federal government in an attempt to keep them from implementing the employer and individual mandates. It was my understanding that the states had to opt in to this program.
Let's move on and talk about something else, and I want to quote directly from your literature I was looking at here just a moment ago. You talk about a part-time citizen legislators, not full-time politicians. What is the value of a part-time legislature?
Well, the value of a part-time legislature, in my mind, is that politicians don't have all day long and all year long to think up new rules and regulations. The state of Texas gets by 4 months every 2 years. They don't, they don't have as high an unemployment rate as Michigan does. The schools are every bit as nice. The roads are nicer. We don't need a full-time legislature. Michigan is one of only 4 states in the whole country to have one. Now, there are various levels, naturally, but you've got California, New York, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Michigan has the second highest paid state legislature, it's my understanding. What are we getting for our money? Not much, I'd say. And if you have a legislative calendar, then people have an opportunity to look at the legislation beforehand. Everybody can decide whether or not they're for or against a particular piece of legislation, and you're going to have more honest debates and informed citizens, I think. There's a part-time legislature ballot initiative coming up, and we're working hard when we go door to door to get signatures for that as well. Independent of the outcome of the election, I think that's an important thing.
What does that do in terms of power shift? Does that give staff, bureaucrats, if you will, and or the executive branch more sway over what happens in day-to-day government if you don't have a legislative body there?
I don't think so. Certainly the bureaucratic staffs already have way more power than is appropriate in any state. Here in Michigan, I think it's particularly bad. The Department of Environmental Quality is almost completely unaccountable to anyone. And as far as the governor having more power, the ballot initiative in question has a provision that he's not able to implement something, or that the legislature can make a few phone calls and stop him from implementing something until the next session, if there's something so egregious. Look, legislation has to go through all the same process as it does now. It's just going to take a little bit longer. Our legislature, I think, in the last year, introduced 200 resolutions honoring particular days. Now, Senator Kahn, I believe, introduced something called International Talk Like a Pirate Day. Now, Michigan, we get a pretty high unemployment rate. There's a lot of problems in this state. If a guy's got time to introduce, and now we officially recognize here in Michigan, International Talk Like a Pirate Day, seems to me like they've got entirely too much time on their hands.
And again, just taking away from some of your points, eliminate the income tax, you say, allows you to keep more of your money. What does that cost the state if you eliminate the income tax?
$6 billion annually, approximately $6 billion annually. Now, people say, well, that's a lot of money. Now, what are we going to do with that? We get close to a $50 billion a year budget. And if you were to simply index government employees' benefits packages to the average of the private sector, you'd save $5.8 billion. It's not really a question of money. It's a question of management practices. The state's spending too much money.
But isn't it a bit of a question of money? Because the $50 billion is actually a little more than $50 billion. Much of that is federal pass-through dollars, whereas the income tax is very much used for the general fund, general purpose, which means you would take a big chunk. I mean, because that budget alone is only around $13 billion.
Right.
So that would be half of the general fund, general purpose.
Yeah, maybe, but I'm guessing that there are an awful lot of things that you could do to save that money. People talk about Mr. Hansen is on the campaign trail. You'll hear him talking about reducing regulations on Michigan businesses, and you can go back and search his record from the time he was in the House until today, and you won't find any piece of legislation that he introduced to do something like that. Now, I'm going to suggest something that some people might regard as radical. Let's get rid of Michigan OSHA altogether, the Office of Occupational Health and Safety. It's a tax collecting agency fundamentally. I mean, they're not making anybody any safer. The big factories all hire stop-loss experts to come in and make sure that they don't have to pay claims. They're insurance people. They don't want to pay claims. We've got federal workplace standards already. What are we paying these people to do? They're tax collecting.
Those two candidates will face off in the August primary. The winner will face Democrat Kathy Forbes in November. We'll be back to take a look at another race that features both an incumbent and a challenger, this time for the state house. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. There are perhaps as many as 24 primary races for State House, State Senate, and for the U.S. House that we're going to try to cover right here on Sunday mornings. But if we can't get to all of them, rest assured they'll be at woodtv.com. We continue this morning with another race that features an incumbent and a challenger. Representative Amanda Price serves in Ottawa County's 89th district. She's being challenged by another Republican, Matt Wiedenhoft. Start with the beginning. You're running for re-election. Mm-hmm. What makes you decide to run?
In the first place, when I ran 3.5 years ago, Michigan was in a pretty big world of hurt, and I thought I had the skill set to run and get up to speed very quickly. And so that was the initial impetus to go forward. And so this time I'm running because we're still needing to do some of those reforms that we haven't quite got accomplished.
When I talk to incumbents, particularly those in the majority, like you are, they point to what they see as a state in a better state mm-hmm. than it was when they started. Earlier in this show, I talked to Senator Hansen. That was his take. Assuming that's yours, how do you think Michigan is better off?
Unemployment rate's down. Budgets are balanced. We've got people moving back to the state. We have more jobs. Our credit ratings are better. I just think the overall aspect of Michigan is better from the outside looking in and from the inside, how we feel about ourselves as a state as well. So,
What remains to be done? What do you want to do if you're reelected for what would be your final 2 years in the House? What would you like to accomplish?
shoring up the business climate, bringing more jobs back to Michigan. As chair of local government, there are a few things more that we need to do at that level, and making government more accountable and efficient. So,
There is no shortage of issues that will come up on the plate. Maybe not this summer because a lot of people will be campaigning. Maybe even in the lame duck session this fall. But some of the things that people still talk about a lot in the question, and we were having the conversation just before we began, what do you do about roads? The House has forwarded a plan, but what is, from your perspective, as someone who has served, the realistic possibility that something significant happens with road funding in this state?
well, we have, in my mind, and this year left, three huge issues. Road funding, maybe car insurance, and Detroit. Road funding is probably at the forefront of everyone's mind right now as they bump over the potholes and try to extricate themselves out of them. I think, Speaker Bolger's plan is a good start. You take a look at what you can do with the resources you have already. Could we spend general fund money? Can we realign some of the ways that taxes are collected and paid out? And then you do have to take a realistic look at where we are with our roads. And while I think $500 million at this point with his proposal is a good idea, we're not going to get all the way there. And keeping in mind that even more funding gets us to maybe a good state, but not great roads. So we've significantly underinvested in road infrastructure for a long time, and it will take a bit of money to get us there.
You also mentioned auto insurance. No-fault reform is what you're talking about, and that is an issue that I have described in the past as meaning full employment for every lobbyist in Lansing. I mean, because everybody's on one side or the other, and the two sides are relatively well entrenched. How difficult will it be to come to a consensus there?
I think as we take a look at the costs, and more of our, especially our elderly or older constituents are giving us feedback about costs of their car insurance, no fault. There's closer and closer thinking towards this. We've had significant discussions about it last term and this term, and so there's some good talk out there.
I got about 30 seconds left. We talked about this just before we started. You like going door to door and talking to people. You're going to get a chance to do that as we hope summer finally arrives. And as summer moves into fall, give me your 30-second pitch when you go to the door and ask for a vote.
If you like the way Michigan has been run for the last 3 years, please vote for me.
So why did you decide to run for this office, and why now?
The reason I ran for this office is after looking at everything that was going on in our district, I felt it was time now, not later, to make sure that our values in the 89th were represented. So it was now, not later.
What are those values that you say by your implication you believe are not being represented?
Well, there's two really big ones that were red flags to me. Number one was the Medicaid expansion in Michigan. The core values of the 89th district do not agree with that, and neither did 2/3 of the Republican Party. The second one is Common Core education. Common Core is not good for our students, for our future, our grandkids, their grandkids. So looking at those two main issues is what compelled me to do this.
Well, let me ask you then about those two issues. Let's start with Medicaid expansion. You know how contentious that was. You saw the governor fly back from his trip from Israel, and the ongoing dialogue, if not battle, that he had with the Republicans in the Senate, primarily to get that passed. But it is passed. Is that something that you believe you can, for the, pardon the improper usage, that you can unpass?
Yeah, I believe so. When 2/3 of the Republicans don't agree with something, and then you can add to that majority, then yeah, there's a way to and in your words, unpass it. It's not the right thing for Michigan. It's not the right thing for the 89th.
What would you do? And I'm just trying to process this because, as you know, the promise was that as many as another 400, 500,000 people might go onto that system. Certainly that many have not, but some have, certainly in the tens of thousands. What would happen with those people?
The thing is, instead of looking at increasing Medicaid, why don't we increase the economy so those people can get their health coverage through their work and not through the state of Michigan? Let's increase that sector of our economy where we can increase jobs, make a vibrant economic growth, and not push people that way. Let's push them to work and not to government assistance.
Let's switch to Common Core. Those are the two primary things you talked about when you decided to run. Common Core is controversial with a lot of folks, though it has been adopted pretty broadly across the United States. Some states are starting to take a second look. Is that what you think Michigan should be doing?
Definitely. We need to take a second look, and after that second look, immediately remove it from our system. It is not the way the kids should be learning. There's people all over the nation speaking out about this. You're watching states fall off. Indiana being one of them. Our neighboring state where we compete for businesses to come in, they may look at that one issue and decide to go to Indiana over Michigan. Let's not have that. That's not even competition for us.
What is your primary objection to Common Core? Because as the proponents would say, this is a set of overall standards. It's not telling you what to teach, but basically the standard to which to teach.
Standardized testing does not work for everybody. Whether or not a kid does well on a standardized test does not mean he's going to do well when he's an adult. And that's one of the issues with it. We're standardized testing everybody. They say it's not a curriculum, but teachers are not going to sway from what they are calling a not curriculum.
So in other words, it ends up being teaching to a test.
100% teaching to a test. The teachers I have spoken with are against it. They don't like it. The parents, the school that I put my kids in, St. Mary's Catholic School, adopted it and within a very, very short period of time removed it because of the uproar.
Do we need, from your perspective, some way to measure school A to school B and the performance of those students? And do we need a yardstick to measure the educational ability of our kids from state to state, since, as you point out, we are in competition for other states for jobs and businesses moving in?
There's always got to be a standard. And it's just, and no matter what you do, there's a standard. Whether it's a business or education, there's got to be a standard. But the standard should be done at the local level, not at the federal at all. And even with the state, it needs to be down to the local. They're the ones that know their community best. That's where we need the standards to be set.
I talked with another candidate from another district, and I ended up the interview this way, about 30 seconds. You know you're going to be knocking on doors. When you knock on that door and somebody comes, you introduce yourself. What is your sales pitch to win in this primary?
This is who I am. My name is Matt Wiedenoth. I'm here to represent you. That's why we're called representatives. It's not about what Matt Wiedenoth wants. It's about what you want as a constituent. What does the 89th want? That's what I'm there for, and that's what I'm going to do. I've always been that way. You can do whatever you want to me. That's fine. But as soon as you mess with somebody else, I'm going to jump on you. And that's how I look at this. You're messing with the people in my district, I'm going to stand up and fight for you.
Those two will face off in the August primary. The winner will face the Democrat Don Bergman in the November election. And we're back with more To the Point in just a moment. And so we have begun taking a look at all of those primary races that you'll have to decide in August. Next week, we will continue with more state house and state senate races, including some really crowded fields. We'll continue to follow those right through August and, of course, the general elections as we head into November. I hope you'll join us next and every Sunday morning, To the Point.